These ones.
To go.
A few words of welcome. I mean, I like to think that nobody ever gives a lecture here that's boring, but this is like a super non-boring person, and it's really fantastic to have Majora here, who's been for many of you in the room, but I think also for the field, and you know, we have architects and planners and preservationists and so on. You've kind of redefined what their own work is, even if they wouldn't be influenced by actually what you do. You've changed the definition of what constitutes a neighborhood and action within a neighborhood and participation in the economy. So basically, you've created problems here because the playing field changes when you think about the effects that you've had and the work that you've done. Of course, I mean, it's there are very few people of which you can say such a thing, that they have basically developed strategies for rethinking the way that neighborhoods can grow and participate and what constitutes opportunities for for citizens, and therefore what constitutes citizenship, right? You can be a different kind of person. And in that sense, the city itself becomes the vehicle for citizenship, right? So in a school like this, in which we think that the city represents the highest sort of social aspirations, it's really phenomenal to have this other way of reading and thinking and acting. And I think it's so much of what you do is counterintuitive in the sense of, for example, gentrification becomes a kind of positive ecological force that comes with all sorts of things come with it that one doesn't expect. And in the end, the public good can be served by the thing that seems to be at odds with this. I also think it's sort of great that you're going to talk about this project, and so it's sort of coming back to where I think it all began. I mean, the South Bronx, more or less around 2000 or the beginning of this century, and basically just the thought that one could make available the first open waterfront park in forever, 60 years, so 3 generations or so, was an astonishing transformation and a redefinition of what constituted the South Bronx anyway. And for many of the people who would have learned about that park, that may have been the first time they learned about the South Bronx in general from outside. And then I think you were the executive director of Sustainable South Bronx for 7 or 8 years, but then have sort of spread the logic out across the United States, and now, so it's sort of great to come back to a site back in the South Bronx and so on. And I think there's nothing I can say that will do justice to what you do, but I think this concept of environmental justice, which sort of hangs around your work, such that if you're going to speak about environmental justice, you should refer to this work. I think it's a really interesting concept, and the way I see it in your work is it's not simply environmental justice, like this is one of the many forms of justice you could have. It actually starts to suggest ultimately that justice would always be about environment, because if some sense of equality and some sense of what it means to be living with other people and taking care of the people that you live with is built into the concept of justice, then it's an environmental concept. Like justice would be an environmental concept. So a just city would be, you would be addressing the environment. So once again, this is kind of thrilling when you're in a school of architecture, because the city itself again becomes a protagonist or the environment itself becomes a protagonist in the concepts of justice. So I think the fact that somebody can be doing this absolutely brilliant work and have us rethink what the concept of justice is a really extraordinary thing, and you just have to know that you have corrupted many of the people in this school already, and I'm sure that after tonight you'll corrupt even more, but this is just a wonderful person, Majora Carter.
Well, that has got to be the nicest introduction a girl could ever get. And really, I do appreciate that very much for a number of reasons, but in particular, the whole idea that anybody could really help or could help change the way folks think about a community is so near and dear to my heart. Because, you know, I'm from one of those places, you know, where a lot of folks didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what the folks in those type of communities were feeling or thinking or hoping and praying for. So it is really an interesting dynamic to kind of come to a place like this and talk about the work that I do. And the other interesting thing is that, environmental justice, which really is it's a principle that means that no one should have to bear the brunt of lots of environmental burdens and not enjoy some environmental benefits. And that really is the crux of a lot of work, especially when you look around in this country and countries around the world, where you find that the poorer or the darker people are, that's where they'll find the most environmental burdens. So this is a reality for a lot of folks, but I think, as far as my thinking has gone, I've even moved, I think, a little bit beyond just that idea, and it really is this quest for equality. The fact that everything that was so great that in our country, if you just think about it, you think about the American Revolution, you think about the civil rights struggle, you think about the fight for the right for women to vote, and what you find are people who were just not satisfied with the status quo. They were totally looking at what could possibly be the next great step for them. And I think as a result of it, everything changed. Everything benefited as a result of that. And so, yes, I do believe that environmental equality is the next thing, because your environment is writ large. It is everything that is around you. It is the air you breathe. It is the water that you drink. It is the quality of the life that you have in your community. It is the quality of the jobs that you may or may not have. And all of those things, are coupled together as far as from where I'm sitting, under that mantra. And so with that, I actually do have something in common with the Tea Party, which is, wreaked havoc on a lot of things that many folks hold dear right now, but they're a really powerful kind of group. And that is the fact that I'm really interested in a smaller government. But the way that I want to see that happening is literally by creating jobs for our most expensive citizens. So who are our most expensive citizens right now? They're the people who actually cost the most in terms of social service dollars spent. So whether it's on unemployment or public health issues or even low educational attainment, for their kids, or even incarceration, they have a tendency to use the most amount of dollars, but aren't necessarily getting any better. And so when you think about how do you create communities that really do provide the absolute best opportunities for our most expensive citizens to move from being tax burden to taxpayer, and actually raising up the quality of the communities that they live in order for that to happen, that is what the work that I'm doing is all about. And so with that, I'm just going to give you a quick little history, of where, I'm from. This is literally what I grew up with. In the late 1960s and 70s, the Bronx was burning. It was literally the like an epicenter for urban blight. Often call that in many cases. I grew up watching my neighborhood on the nightly news with stuff like this. I remember the 1977 World Series when Howard Cosell, and most of you are probably too young to remember that name, but he was like this sportscaster with a voice like this, and this is Howard Cosell and the Bronx is burning. You don't remember that. Well, anyway, it was, other than Mr. October, that was Reggie Jackson also, hit 3 home runs that year, but at the World Series, that's what he reported on, that the blimp, which was overlooking the Bronx at the time, there were 3 huge fires burning, set by building owners or maybe just, whoever. But most of the time, landlords were burning their own buildings to collect insurance money. So this the kind of financial disinvestment that I grew up with. This is a building that I literally walk past on my way to work every day. But this is what we grew up with, feeling this type of, these were our playgrounds. So it wasn't just financial disinvestment, from the financial side. It was also just, I think, in terms of cultural education. Schools were literally pulling things out like playgrounds and music programs, and mostly playgrounds because it was a liability and they didn't want to have to deal with it. But it was an issue, in our community, the fact that it did kind of look and feel like a war zone. In fact, my brother was actually killed in a drug war in the neighborhood next door to mine. But when it was a very different place, from when my parents moved there back in the late 1940s. They were a part of that great American migration of blacks that moved up from down south in search for their better life. when they moved to the Hunts Point section of the South Bronx, it was mostly a white working class community, and actually a walk to work neighborhood, because it was a little residential area that had industrial area around it. We did so much steel in Hunts Point at the time, we were called Little Pittsburgh. Later on, folks like other folks from down south, black folks, and then later on, folks, black and brown folks from the Caribbean started moving in. White flight happened. The highway construction boom happened. It happened all over the country. Our master planner here was, of course, the not so great late Robert Moses, who would do things like give people less than a month's notice before they were told, their building was about to be razed to the ground. During this period, the South Bronx lost about 60% of its residents as a result of the highway construction, the burnings, and just people feeling like they just were not going to be there much longer. So again, not the first financial crisis we've been through. That was redlining, indicative of that, where banks would literally decide where they weren't going to make any kind of investments. But I wanted to make an investment in myself. I was a smart kid, I knew it, and I remember, when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, actually closer to 8, because that was the summer that the buildings on either end of my block burned down. And at the end of that year, my brother was killed. And I knew that I was smart, and I knew that I was not going to stick around this neighborhood for a second longer than I needed to. And which meant I had to get myself into a great high school and into a good college. And that's what I did. But interestingly enough, the universe had another plan for me. I started graduate school right here in New York at NYU. And I was broke and had to move back in with mommy and daddy, which was the worst thing for me at the time. And I know a lot of people are doing that right now, but so good, you can all grow up, and then soon you'll be speaking at Columbia University too. But anyway, it was not something my parents really wanted to hear at the time. But anyway, when I moved back home, what I got a chance to see was my neighborhood in a completely different way, because I did have some education and I did have a little bit of distance, and it did make me a little bit more aware, of my surroundings in a different way, in a much more sensitive way. And at first, the old me was just like, I hate this place, it's because people here are just, they kind of expect to be this way. And I realized that, no, there are actually real reasons, regulatory reasons, zoning, all sorts of reasons that, can be justified by the powers that be, that a community like ours should bear the impact of all of this type of stuff, regardless of the fact that it had such a huge impact on our health. We still have one of the country's highest childhood asthma hospitalization rates. Diabetes and obesity, absolutely related to exactly how a community is planned. So whether it's, if parents are thinking that their kids are going to get hit by a truck, because that's the way the trucks are zoned in a community, they won't let their kids go outside and play, or if they feel that it's going to compromise their already compromised respiratory systems, or if they're feeling like, there isn't any place for us to buy decent and affordable healthy produce, so we're just going to eat the crap that's here. This is what we get. But the absolute worst thing, and this is where I will love Columbia University for the rest of my life, because they did this piece of research that I knew somebody needed to do. Back in 2006, Columbia did this study that conclusively linked proximity to fossil fuel emissions to learning disabilities in young children. Now that was something that we kind of knew, but until we actually heard conclusively that there was a direct link. When you think about it, when you look at poor communities and you find out where are these fossil fuel emitting sources, they're there, right, or near close by. And then we know that poor kids who do poorly in school go to jail in this country. We didn't really understand the actual, how clear that pathway from poverty to prison actually was. But moving back home really made me understand that I could and should be a part of this thing that was going to create change in our community. And I could either work to fight against stuff, which we did. We still are working with the city to create a more sustainable solid waste management plan, and I think it's really, really close right now, which I'm very excited about. But the thing that really moved me was thinking about, well, what kind of community do we actually want? Because nobody really ever came to us to ask us that. So it was a time for us to kind of dream about that. And, you know, people kept coming up with really very few things. Like, you know, when you do planning processes in wealthy community, people will be like very clear about, I would like a XYZ on ABC block, because they know exactly what they want. They've been thinking about it, and they've just been waiting for you to ask them if they probably told you even before they asked, even before you asked. Poor neighborhoods, they don't do that. They really don't. And so when we started these planning processes, the real things that came out were just things that you would think were just normal. Like, well, you know, it'd be nice to have clean air. It'd be, you know, a good thing for my kid to have a safe place to play so I don't have to worry about them getting hit by a truck. It'd be nice to have like a good transportation system that worked for me. And it'd be really nice to have some jobs. Really simple fare. And I was like, okay, I can work with that. So first things first, around the time we were fighting against the waste facility, I kept getting these notices from this group that got funds from the U.S. Forestry Service, and they were working with the New York City Parks Department, and they wanted to work to support America's rivers, or New York's rivers in particular, and we only have one, which is the Bronx River. And so they kept saying there was these little restoration projects, and I honestly only knew the Bronx River from a subway map. I didn't realize that the river literally was within 6 blocks of my house, because I'd never been there. I mean, the neighborhood, you know, I lived on a peninsula, but the neighborhood was literally ringed by industry all around it. So I never got close to it. But I got this crazy dog who took me jogging and one day led me into this. And this is a picture after many, many, many cleanups. It literally, when I found it, when my dog pulled me into it, it literally had piles of garbage over my head. And if I didn't have a crazy 80-pound dog in front of me, there is no way I would have walked into that place. But I did, and fortunately I did, because this is what this park looks like now. We got that little tiny seed grant. We were able to leverage that over and over again. I talked to anybody who would listen, and you know, and I had such crazy, strange bedfellows. It was bizarre, you know, between government and private industry and local community as well. But we were able to use that as a real amazing way to sort of bring the kind of equality, you know, to this community. And people were like shocked, you know, when they realized that this was actually something in their own community and that was theirs, you know, for partaking. And I actually got married there back in 2001, and this is the dog that led me there, Xena, who is still alive and kicking, believe it or not, at 14 and a half. But it really was this awesome little thing that just made us all believe that there was something that if we thought and really concretized the idea of what planning in our community could be, and that it was there to actually support us, then we could actually be a part of it. And it was a really neat thing to be a part of as well. That really helped me think more and long and hard about how else do we plan for our community in terms of the type of things that people were really interested in seeing. You know, one was, you know, another thing was another person told me about this federal transportation program through Federal Highway Administration called CMAQ, and they were giving or making you apply and go through a really onerous process for transportation projects that improved air quality and reduced congestion. And I heard about these things called greenways, and I, you know, like in Bogota and in Copenhagen, and honestly, I didn't really know what they were, but I was just thinking, well, you know what, that's actually an interesting idea, you know, because they provide, you know, safe bicycle and pedestrian pathway. They make the place look prettier, you know, it makes people feel safer, and it could provide opportunities for economic development. Then later on, I learned about this thing called stormwater management, and I was like, that's what we need here. Wrote the proposal, got $1.25 million to do the whole feasibility study, and because we were actually a shovel-ready project, we were able to raise about $25 million more, you know, from the stimulus package to make it happen. And so this, and unfortunately, what I wasn't good at doing early on was taking pictures of stuff early on. So this was actually the second phase part of the Greenway development, and this is what it looks like now. And so in the idea that this creates a just much more hospitable environment for folks is just a really important thing. But speaking about hospitable environments, people want desperately to feel as though they're intimately involved with their own personal and financial well-being, right? And so one of the things I kept hearing from folks is that the parks were great, you know, environmental, you know, equity and equality was all good, but and we had, of course, had to take care of our kids and stuff, but the really disturbing things for folks was the lack of jobs. And honestly, what people actually saw the most was as we worked to build these parks, the city kept bringing in people from outside the neighborhood to do much of this work. And so we we created this green job training program where we literally got folks from our community and taught them, the things in the fields of ecological restoration, starting first with wetland restoration or riverfront restoration, because that's where most of the work was happening, and then later on urban forestry management and green roofing, and learning how to clean up contaminated lands so that they could be actively reused. And we worked with folks, most of whom who were from the neighborhood. Well, they were all from the neighborhood, especially to start. Later on, it became a citywide program. But we were able to help them learn those hard skills, but also really the soft skills of how do you learn how to be, a team player. How do you make sure that you've got new opportunities to really lead and show initiative. And in many of these folks, because they were incarcerated many times, or folks who had been in social services and public welfare for like pretty much all their lives, many of them have never had a job before. So teaching them those type of skills and giving them the kind of care that they needed to understand that they actually could do that, because that was a big thing. I mean, you could have like a hardened guy who literally was able to run like quite a drug business and be really successful at it, but who'd actually never dealt with an institution before. And so giving them the skills that they actually could roll into these circles and be as productive as anybody else could was a really powerful thing. And so that's why we were able to enjoy this type of rate while I ran that program. We also wanted to show that learning that green was also not just about hugging trees or wearing Birkenstocks, both of which I do on occasion, but we wanted to show that there's some money in there. So we actually started one of the first, as far as I know, community-initiated green roof installation companies, and with the sole purpose, of really showing folks that when you created these type of projects, that you would be able to support the type of accessible job creation that actually provided a public benefit. So stormwater management, air quality improvement, creating the infrastructure so that people could do this type of work. And we also worked on policy measures, got a local law passed, to provide a $4.50 per square foot tax abatement for anybody who wanted to put a green roof on. So this was the first job that we did, which was on my roof actually. So these are little seedlings and stuff that they planted, and this is what it looked like, a year later when everything grew in. And another just great opportunity there. Oh, and so the idea around here is that what we can create, or again, real accessible jobs, for folks, and this is the type of thing that I'm hoping that we could do, ways to help create jobs for people who need them with services that our city needs. So that's what, those accessible jobs mean. So, but the reason why we're here is that, I spent a long time doing some of that work, and then the last 4 years actually working on my own consulting practice. And so I got a chance to go all around the country and did some advisory service and speaking, and it was great and all that stuff. But the bottom line is I'm a practitioner, and I do best when I can work to identify a problem and then figure out a groovy way to fix it. Like that to me is like crack. I mean, I love it more than anything. So that being said, actually, frankly, being on the road as much as I was on it, and I'm not as young as I used to be, I was like, what? There's a part of me that just also wants to go home, and do some work that I know is meaningful to lots of different people. But I kind of felt the need to go back to my own stomping grounds, to tell you the truth. And so I'm starting a new nonprofit called Hometown Security Laboratories, and it's basically an R&D lab to prove out the type of models that I think are really important for local economic development, period. Based on the platform that I had at Sustainable South Bronx, but also the things that I've learned from traveling around the country and seeing what some of the problems have been for pretty much everybody. And so with that, here we have this building. So this is the Spofford Juvenile Detention Facility. My dad was a janitor there back in from the 1960s up until 1970 something or so. And it was this place that, is sort of legendary, in the circles of in inner city neighborhoods in New York City for being the place that is the college for criminals. Kids would go in there and they would come out even worse than they went in. And I remember my dad, specifically when I was a kid, talking to my mom and wishing that our house was bigger so that we could take in more kids. I mean, we did a lot anyway. So it was just one of those things that were really kind of fascinating about being a kid living around the corner from this space. But so I remember it was just last year, I'm thinking about what the heck do I want to do? And I've just been, and I was kind of struggling because I think I've been in like way too many cities and saw the same exact thing happening in terms of real estate development. And I was like, goodness gracious, there's really only two kinds of real estate development in poor communities, only two. There's the kind that assumes gentrification is going to happen, which means the place is going to get really cool and the poor people aren't going to be able to be a part of it anymore. And the other piece was that the community was just going to stay poor. And you see it in terms of the types of quote-unquote economic developments that are brought into those communities. So whether it's super highly subsidized affordable housing or lack of financial institutions, instead you see things like, depending on the part of the country you're in, either payday loan places or pawn shops or check cashing stores, or sometimes all three if you're really lucky. And then you've got, your choices, as a consumer are quite limited, to say the least. I know for a fact I import most of my food from Manhattan, and I live within blocks of this still. So I remember, and I was just like, this is just crazy that there are only two kinds. And I think there's gotta be a better way to do this a little more creatively, and one that assumes that there's a possibility out there, that people don't have to stay stuck in their economic position, and that we could, in fact, craft a way that's going to be supportive of people and moving up an economic ladder. And I thought about that because I was also thinking about integration and actually the unintended consequences of it. The fact that, at one point, in the history of this country, segregation was completely legal, actually on the books. Now it's just sort of like, it just happens. But then it was, but during the time when it was totally legal, and in black communities you had, it was not uncommon, for a black doctor to live within very close proximity to a janitor. And once integration happened, folks that had the means and were able to exercise a choice to move where they wanted to live, they exercised that right. And God bless them. People should be able to do whatever they want to do in terms of where they live, and that's fine and dandy. But what we saw was a destabilization, of those communities, because the folks that were there actually did provide, I believe, sort of an aspirational model for a lot of folks. So, and if you see folks, and people will become what they can see. And if they don't see it, it'll be hard for them to do that. So to sort of see that was also really an interesting dynamic, and I experienced to some extent, during the burning of the Bronx, because there were definitely folks of more, no one was wealthy, believe me, but there were definitely some middle class people living in my neighborhood when I was a kid. And what happened was when the fire started happening, the kids that would start school with a whole month's worth of brand new clothing, as opposed to the rest of us that wore hand-me-downs, those were the first kids who were out. Their parents took them and they moved them to New Rochelle or even Co-op City, wherever. They were just out. And so to see that, to experience that, on that level, it was clearly what was happening was that the hopeful ones left, and left this sort of political vulnerable position, an economically unstable one as well. So one day I was walking to work, looked down and realized really what we need is actually opportunities to create the places that people of different incomes would like to live in, because it's so cool that people want to be there. And then the other piece is that you also have to create mixed-use economic developments so that people could actually become less poor and be really deliberate about it and actually harness the power of gentrification. Because the last time I checked, poor people actually like nice things too. We want to be able to shop in our own community. You know, we want to be able to have really beautiful, safe places to play and all the nice things that people from other incomes would like to have too. I mean, that's just human. So to think about that, and I looked down the hill and realized that's the space that's big enough that could allow that to happen. And through some really interesting circumstances, this property is actually going to be released for a request for proposals by HPD next year. And we absolutely have every intention of winning that RFP. I'm working to develop some joint ventures with some larger real estate developers whose balance sheet matches my vision. So we actually have a fighting chance. So little things like that. So but I think it's a really incredible project. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about that. So this is the site. And interestingly enough, and this is what I meant early when I said, you know, yeah, I kind of want to be back working in my own neighborhood on different stuff. And so real estate development is that, and how we can use it as a social, environmental, and economic tool to really create some change in our neighborhood. But the bottom line is the South Bronx is not that much different from a lot of post-industrial cities around the country. When you think about the fact that, you know, there's the yellow part, which is where the residents live, and then the blue part was the formerly industrial area, and then you've got this little weird hinge area where the Spofford market is, and it's right in the middle of that. And then what you do, or whenever you're looking, you know, at the topography and the assets, that you look at a place, you look for what the assets are, right? So there are some pretty groovy things going on. You've got public transportation, you know, actually a good bit of it. Then you also have the Greenway coming in. You're going to have like these different ways to connect people to each other and to outside the community. So what I'm like, again, not necessarily this kind of hinge area, you know, everybody's got some assets. I thought this could be sort of a really interesting replicable model. And so in terms of this mixed income housing and mixed use commercial development though, you know, that's where it kind of gets really interesting, because the mixed use, the mixed income housing, it is by nature designed to be a place so that you have people of different incomes living in really close proximity of each other. You know, and I don't expect for people to come up from Park Avenue to want to live up in the South Bronx. But what I do expect are the people from communities like the South Bronx who actually have done really well for themselves. And then they might want to come back, but they don't. Because guess what? They don't have the little cute cafes. They don't have, you know, the kind of things that they can expect and can frankly afford. There are not a whole lot of people like me living in my neighborhood. There really aren't. And there are really, really fabulous, smart, wonderful people born and raised there during my time and who leave because there are better things for them out there. They come back and visit all the time, but I'm trying to create a community that will be attractive, you know, to folks like that. And so, but the other thing is that when you're creating opportunities for people to become less poor, so that's the whole piece about the mixed use economic development. So everything, you know, where are the trends coming in right now? They are absolutely, you know, in technology. We are Silicon Alley, second only to Silicon Valley. A lot of the jobs that are out there, or a good portion of them anyway, you know, yes, they require an engineering degree. Some actually only supply or need a certificate, and you can still do pretty gosh darn well. And so the idea, or even just the idea that you can use technology as a way to make your small business as an entrepreneur function better, though that's a whole other thing that we want to work on. So really setting up infrastructure so that those two things can actually happen. And really, in particular around manufacturing, whether it's rapid prototyping or stuff in the food processing world. Again, really big growth trends, you know, for the city right now. Public space, great democratizer. You've got some awesome, you need really beautiful public open space so everybody could enjoy. I mean, that is, I think, the thing that separates us from the great beasts. And of course, commercial and retail. People, you need opportunities for there to be local economic ways for dollars to circulate within your community. So whether it's restaurants, cafes, groceries, things like that. So, but in terms of the whole technology piece, like this, we worked with MIT's Media Lab to bring a Fab Lab here. That's short for Fabrication Laboratory. This was actually sort of a tricked out NASCAR trailer. Everything that's in here was actually created using rapid prototyping, which is what you do in a fabrication laboratory. So those are, and it's all it is when you mix personal computers with fabrication machines. And, and rapid prototyping, I think, is just really incredible. You can do things as simple as jewelry and as unbelievable as organs. There's actually a doctor who actually creates organs using rapid prototyping, and people are alive and kicking, which is really kind of awesome. You couldn't do that in a place like this, obviously, but the idea that that technology is out there, is incredible. But we participated in this project because what we really wanted was people in our local community to be able to see themselves as creators and inventors along the technology track. And so in our community, it's like, we're often told that there's nothing really good that can come out of a place like that. So actually having new opportunities there so that people could literally create something was a really powerful thing. And especially, in this sort of crazy environment, where there was so much waste running through it. So, but of course, some of the folks in the neighborhood that were a part of that program realized that those pallet boxes, where a lot of the goods that come into the neighborhood are brought in on, and then they're just like taken to another neighborhood, generally in Connecticut or somewhere down south, where they're either incinerated or landfilled, which is not something that we want to see happen too much. But when you pull those things apart and then lash them together and run it through one of these machines, you actually have furniture. And so this was actually a really sweet little side hustle that some of the young people participated in, for a while. Most of them before they went to college, which was really nice. And so we're also, again, building on, the things that are already happening in the community, whether it's the Greenway, developing, real opportunities for meaningful public art and public engagement. But also, it's really just strategically a way for us to really think about what goes on in our community and then plan for something different. Like right now, this street, because in the way that it was planned, like literally there were tons of planning exercises that happened in the community. The Department of City Planning did, and UDC, and blah, 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 and you name it. But on this particular block, nothing happened. Why? Because because it was right next to this jail. And it wasn't close enough, even though, like you can see over here, wait, where is it? Like right there, people live there, but this particular block, like there's like half of a truck parking lot, some of these like really low end, engine rebuild places and a little dingy chop shop. Nothing happened there, nothing. And so now, since it's literally kind of not even thought about in terms of the city's eye, this is actually a place where it's a good spot that truckers know about for them to come to pick up a prostitute. However, if you think about the site and really think about how do you activate it and literally send, not just a message, but literally all sorts of new activity so that it's not just this place, where only these like nasty illicit things are happening, but that something really beautiful can happen, then that's how you change what a community actually is. And so the idea of Spofford in and of itself is not that, that we don't, because the thing that really struck me, the most when I kind of had this epiphany about real estate development, that there are only two kinds of it in poor neighborhoods, and the thing that hit me like a ton of bricks was that despite all the work that I've done, and I've done some really good work, and despite all the work that a lot of folks around this country have done to create really fantastic projects, I realized that quite frankly, it felt like a Band-Aid. When I really looked at the role that real estate development could play on community development, it made me really sad. And that's why I realized I needed to move into that and learn everything that I needed to learn to like make it happen. But so the idea of so many of projects that we work on is that, when you have a project, it's a beautiful thing, and then it's going to be everything to everyone, and the ripple effect is going to be fabulous. But no, it's not a ripple effect. It's got to be a real deliberate approach that is going to literally define how real estate development happens in the future. Literally raises the bar for what happens, because when we do all of our economic analysis, the whole idea is for us to understand that it's meant to show that you can do real estate development differently in poor communities. That is the whole point that we're trying to prove in that regard, and use it as a way to really improve the life and the possibilities for people to move out of poverty and into something that resembles more of prosperity, and thinking about how our communities can change and blossom as a result of it. And so I thank you for your time.
Questions?
Hello.
Yeah. Hi. First of all, thanks again for coming, Majora. I work in commercial building energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
One of my questions.
Thank you.
That your presentations are. Can everybody hear me now? One of my questions is, okay, you're talking about real estate, you're talking about reactivating buildings, right, fundamentally, and obviously the streets and landscapes around them, but you're talking about green jobs and stuff. What role do you see energy efficiency playing in both the job creation aspects of your ventures as well as, the practical matters of owning and maintaining real estate, right?
Yeah.
Energy efficiency, your cost of ownership both for tenants and for you as a developer. Just interested to hear how those things may be coming together in your new work.
Right. Well, as a national board member of the U.S. Green Building Council, obviously, I'm going to have to do my darndest, to make sure that it meets a standard that is just beyond crazy, to be honest. But of course, fine. Like what? I don't know if it's going to be living buildings crazy, but I'm going to make sure that it's going to be pushed to platinum. And we're also talking about, you're familiar with LEED neighborhood development, right? Of course, and how it actually doesn't apply. And it's a building, it's a standard, design for community development, right? But it doesn't apply at all to existing neighborhoods, which is just the stupidest thing. But so the idea, I know, and I'm a bad board member, but that's why they brought me on, to help them. So, but the idea is that, look, if you can create some standards so that it's clear, like there actually is sort of like not marching orders, but really a deliberate plan for like, what do you, when you've got an existing community that actually is struggling, what do you do, and how best can you move it to a better place?
My question even more specifically was, like, for instance, you're spending money to redevelop properties, like X per square foot, right? Are you measuring, sort of how much that's impacted local jobs, like construction spend on local residents? And
although I just had a talk with one of my mentors this morning who just advised me not to think that one project is going to accomplish all of your goals. So it's like, okay, I get it. But I still think it's really important to start thinking about it in terms of, this is something that is important to me. Like I want, folks to be able to actively benefit before, during, and after construction, in terms of the economic development of this project. Like it still pains me to this day that this $50 million was spent on the South Bronx Greenway after I left Sustainable South Bronx, and the work was not done to make sure that there was local hire included. So I won't let that happen. I want to make it, I want to be really deliberate about how we do it so we get the most bang for our buck. And I'm going to try my absolute hardest. Like that I can tell you. I can't give you total details just yet because I don't even know them. But it will, I see it, but I totally hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
I wanted to know when I should know this, I should know it, but I don't. When did the jail close?
Spring of 2011.
Did you have anything to do with it?
No, there had been like prison reform advocates and children's aid advocates who had been doing that kind of reform for decades. Decades.
So what's going to happen? So they're not going to replace it at all, and they're transforming it into.
No, over the past several years, the city came up with a better way to handle juvenile offenders, and so it's not like putting thousands of them all together, but actually having much smaller.
Smaller, and it's going to be spread throughout this particular.
Oh yeah, totally, and they
neighborhood.
already are.
And are you involved in that?
Nope, I'm not, but I've got plenty of partners. I mean, personally not, I mean, I guess on the personal, like I'm involved, but it's not the work that I do. What I want to do.
Do you think that that's what should happen? Do you think that juvenile detention centers should be in this neighborhood, or how do you think the master planning of the closing of the prison should?
They seem pretty. The people who actually know a lot more than I do about that were actually that's what they were advocating for. That they needed to be treated first as juveniles and as young people and not as adults, and that there needed to be a better way to deal with them. So. Yeah. Who's talking? Oh.
Hello. So I have a question about the balance of not displacing people when you build something great to activate the space. For instance, this building on the right, the building owner probably lives in Connecticut. When he sees the opportunity to raise the rent 50-75%, and all of those people are displaced, as well as maybe if there are any businesses below, how do you balance that, or what? I mean,
well, I mean, you have to come up. Look, there will always be some. However, I think it's really important to recognize that we're working on developing a community transition plan and really helping folks and really getting people ready, for the fact that things are going to change. Part of that is incorporating into this particular model opportunities for economic developments that people can be prepared and participate in. That's one of the reasons why I'm focusing, and I totally forgot to mention that one of the early projects that we're doing is a program called Startup Box South Bronx. And the idea is, and it's a technology, education, and entrepreneurship program. Right now, we're going to be operating on a little storefront on Hunts Point Avenue, but the whole point is that we're trying to get people to understand the role of technology and entrepreneurship through various programs, and so that they can see their participation in it. Believe me, there will be some folks who will not be around. And some of them, to be honest, I think there'll be plenty of people in our community to be happy for it, to tell you the truth. But I do think that for those who really are eager to really prepare themselves and who are going to be because we're going to do our darndest, because our goal is not to keep people poor and happy. Our goal is to move them out of poverty through economic developments. That is my job. I know that, depending on what group I talk to, I'll tell people, look, I know the Bible says that there will always be the poor among us, but it never, ever said that they would have to be the same poor. Ever. Didn't say that. I read it. I found that passage. It never said it. So I want to see people move out of poverty. I don't want them, because we've done a real tremendous damage, I think, to the poor in this country. And we experience it every single day. I mean, I started it with the most expensive citizens. And you know what? They're not happy where they are either. So let's create opportunities for them to be as productive and as profoundly fabulous as they possibly can be.
Hi there. You mentioned that you're really looking at this as a model, and I'm kind of imagining it as like literally the holy grail of Black urbanism or
I love that.
Brown people urbanism. My question is, and it's interesting that you're coming from a real estate development perspective, and I'm curious about the early ideas about the pro forma. Part of the problem isn't simply can you get a job, because then there's consumer cycles and there's lack of access to funding and things like that. How do you create sort of an ownership fund or pool within your real estate development model?
Right.
And I work for city planning, and I know that this density level is relatively low. So what's that kind of balance with the space that you're creating? Density, the value, with sort of creating a pool for ownership and seed money and all the things to have this heavy lift.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, so there were like 4 questions in there.
So the real estate development model for creating a pool for enabling ownership in these communities, is that the key thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're starting on right now, with this tech entrepreneurship and education project really is about, because we know that that's also going to be an opportunity for people to own as well. And in particular, business creation, because, as you know, within, poor communities of color, we're tremendous consumers.
Right.
We are not major producers, and forget about like that local dollar circulating in your community. That is a personal goal of mine, to help create new entrepreneurs. As we see happen. It really depends. I mean, I don't, I keep hearing people say things like, oh, we need to have like another Steve Jobs. I'm like, I don't really care if we have another Steve Jobs. I mean, bless his soul. But I'm really more interested in people using technology to truly support their businesses in really powerful ways. Because right now, even like, for example, there's one really neat little store. It's a little, one of the only restaurants we have in the neighborhood. And unlike all the other ones, that really could give a crap about how they look, like this particular one, literally, got some planters and made their space look beautiful. I mean, they just did this beautiful facade all on their own. But when you go inside the store, it's like practically barbaric in terms of how they keep and how they manage, their money, and it's just like, it would probably be so much easier, on these folks if there were just like some opportunities for them to be a better business person, just to sort of, so that it's not everything is on paper, just little things like that. But I definitely see a lot in food processing. One of our first projects that we're going to work with right now is a group called, do y'all remember Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? Okay. Well, remember Hillary, the cousin who was really spoiled rotten and liked to shop? Karen Parsons. Anyway, she's now a grown woman and really fabulous. And she actually has she's a brilliant producer and does these gorgeous animated series called Blackberry. It's called Sweet Blackberry, and it's all about getting little-known stories of really fabulous Black Americans that no one's ever heard of, and doing animated series about them. And it was a show on HBO and HBO Family, and we're going to be working with her. With a teen technology group to literally develop the mobile app for that show. So it's like, so these kids are going to be learning how to program, that kind of stuff. So we're seeing on a bunch of different levels, different things happening. So it's a really exciting thing. And I think there's a question back there.
Yeah, I guess I just want to say that you've done a lot of work in the community, sort of positioning yourself to do great things. I guess my question is, what's your sort of next steps in prep for the RFP that you mentioned, that sort of trajectory? Yeah,
we're working on, first of all, I'm looking for a really great partner, because I think that's going to be the difference between us, because I obviously have a lot of value in terms of a vision, but not so much in terms of a balance sheet. And that's something that the city is going to want to look at. But in terms of actually identifying, like, what are some of the available things that we can do within the current zoning, I mean, we can't spend too much time on actually assembling what the site's going to look like, because the RFP hasn't been issued just yet. What we can do is cast a bunch of different scenarios, that's not going to be too troubling, and really, use to the best of our knowledge what we know that the city, would be interested in seeing here. Based on a bunch of their own ideas about what kind of planning should happen here. And so that's what we're in the process of doing right now. And in the meantime, I'm also starting to develop different projects within the neighborhood as well. But this is like the mama, of them. But the other one is this absolutely beautiful little rail station. You'll know Cass Gilbert, the architect that did the Woolworth building, right? He did a bunch of rail stations in the South Bronx as well, and one of them's in Hunts Point, and it happened and it's owned by Amtrak. And so we're actually talking with Amtrak right now to develop it. And it's a tiny little property, it's only like 5,000 square feet. But, I want to use that, to prove out a model of what things could happen. Yeah, it's really exciting. Oh. Yeah. When the lips move, I can see, but everybody else can't. Sorry.
It seems to me that part of the success of all these projects depends on the collaboration you get amongst people, and how you get them excited, make them be part of the process. Is there any way you approach this?
With love and tenderness. Seriously, and it doesn't always work out. And it's really, it's kind of funny, but it's true. But and that's why it's not necessarily about casting like a super wide net in terms of developing partnerships, but it's doing your homework before and really understanding like what's in it for them, like why they should work with you. And I think that, and the fact that, and I wasn't joking about the love and tenderness part either, to tell you the truth, because I genuinely do believe that there's some value in this stuff. And, and I've seen people move in really amazing ways that they didn't know they could move in once they actually allowed themselves to participate. And I'm not just talking about, the single mom on welfare who discovered that, she actually could contribute to society and to her kids in a way that was really powerful to her. Or, I'm talking about like hardened elected officials, who suddenly realize that, we can do these things differently. Or it was, hopefully one of the real estate developers, that I've been interviewing, who like see value in doing things a little bit differently. And it's a really interesting place to be in. And it kind of makes me feel like all like warm and cozy inside when I think about it, because it is I realize that I'm actually offering something, like a real powerful thing, and it makes me happy.
Yeah. Just here, I think. Right.
A lot of the community, desires that you shared with us today, they seem like things that we hope and even expect our government to provide.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that you would like to see government smaller. So I'm wondering if you have ideas of how our public and private sector should approach.
Well, you could call it gibberish. What did you call it?
Oh no, just how they should approach or fulfill your vision.
Look, I think that when you get people to see themselves more as contributing and productive members of society, it automatically shrinks the size of government, because people are contributing something to it, and especially if they're doing it in a way that provides something of importance to the city. It's actually helping. That's the effect of it is it's shrinking. Not that it's not that they're not playing a huge role in it. No, I absolutely, the same way that any other major or even minor real estate developer would be able to benefit from different types of subsidies and whatever in order to build, sometimes some of the crappiest kinds of affordable housing. I absolutely want to make sure that we fully get them, and then some, to be honest. Because I'm like, I know I would do something better than a lot of the crap I've seen built in my own daggone neighborhood. And so with that, like, I don't have an issue with it, but I think that the return on that investment with people that are going to, as we work to build new opportunities to gainfully employ them in services that need to happen, and that actually increase our tax base, that is how government should be used. And that excites me, to think that, we're in a position to really put that kind of stuff out there. That's exciting to me. Yeah.
Right, we got a couple
more. What kind of support do you have from the local authorities, and what would you expect them to do to help you with that project?
Well, by local authorities, what do you mean?
Any type of government entity that would possibly fund or give tax breaks or I mean, as we go forward, I mean, we've talked to like everybody that we need to, from the borough president, the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation. We will, once again, we can't talk too much about it because we don't know what exactly we're asking for just yet, because the RFP has not been released. But the kind of community authority I thought you were talking about was more about, who the local community has signed on to this. Because for the last year, I've literally been talking with community, the heads of community organizations, and also literally doing presentations for anybody who would give us the time, on their agenda, and sometimes even showing up, in the middle, like literally this that's a green dot. Like this building right here is literally one of the few co-op apartments in the neighborhood, which is right across the street from Spofford.
And so literally I made up foam core boards and would go out and stand out in front of them talking about like what a possibility could be here. And they were just like, and it was really interesting because again, these are homeowners essentially, and they were petrified at first that the city was just going to build a homeless shelter there. And these were the kind of things that we heard. The more we talked to people, the more we heard was that they really felt dumped on, that it was going to be another kind of either some kind of shelter or just something that was probably no different from a prison. And so to talk to people, at this point, I don't even know how many people we've spoken to, but it's been, so that kind of community authority, where people are like, wait, we can think about something that's not a shelter or a jail, for that spot. That's really powerful to me. Like we'll go through the other channels as we need to, and I'm sure it'll be really interesting, because local politics always are. But who's that? Exactly. So yeah, I can't wait to go to another community board meeting. Oh, it's going to be so much fun.
Maybe one more or two more. There's one up at the back and one up front.
So you're on the U.S. Green Building Council. I was also wondering, in terms of federal subsidies for these kind of projects, to what degree is this kind of thinking on the national radar? Because in a lot of ways, the types of subsidies that are offered affect the project outcomes in terms of like number of units and density and all that. Especially given the nature of the national conversation and 47% and all that kind of stuff. I mean,
it's all, I guess the devil's in the details, but I really do think that, because a part of crunching the numbers for this project, again, when we have all the details, it really is going to be let's do the numbers and let's look at, what is the cost of an environmentally and economically challenged community. Let's seriously look at those costs. And if we can show, and I think we will be able to, and create a really compelling case for why the type of project that we're going to do actually is going to reap the benefits that most other kind of real estate projects that happen in communities like this do. And if we could tell that story and spin it in a way, and it's not going to be it's not going to be a yarn. I mean, it's going to be true. That I think it's going to be the kind of thing that folks are going to, whether it's the feds or the city, where it's going to be more of an investment and be like, okay, because we know we're going to reap some returns. That's what keeps me going, around this, because I know, believe me, I'm a practical girl, and I'm quite a realist. I know that this is not the way things are done, for the most part, at all. And we're trying to do something that really is kind of crazy, but I think that we are going to have to look for that kind of investment. I'm actually working with actually an ex-Wall Streeter, who struggled a lot and actually kind of had to stop everything that he was doing because he realized that he was doing some stuff that wasn't particularly helpful to humanity. And actually, we're working together to start a fund, a real estate development fund, that literally is going to be talking to foundations in particular around program and mission-related investments, so that they and actually big companies and their treasuries to put money directly, with slow money directly into these type of community development projects. So that kind of private financing, coupled with a real support from the government, I think is the way that we're going to see it happen. Yeah.
I think this last question was way up in the back. Yeah.
I think your approach to regeneration is pretty.
I just saw a mic. Oh, there you go.
Hi.
Sorry.
I think your approach to regeneration by creating local employment is pretty brilliant. And I was just curious as to how you're going to use that for the construction project, and if you're planning on taking the training in rapid prototyping and incorporating it into some kind of design training. And if so, perhaps some of us can help.
I would so love to do that. I can't believe you just said that. Because, I mean, as you know, construction in New York City is just a hellish kind of thing. It just is. But I'd love to talk to you more about that. I really would, because it's like one of those weird things that just been, well, it's not that weird since you know about it. It's been sort of popping up, but I had no idea how to help make that type of thing happen. honestly. So
I think we could help for sure.
Good.
And that's
I
what
dig
we're
it.
doing.
Thank you.
So that seems like a great point to end. I sort of feel like we owe you a dog a lot.
You do, actually. She
Because
jump-started my career.
She took you to this site where you made the park on the very edge of the neighborhood.
Yep, yep.
But now you're really using the same way of thinking. You're working on the very heart of the infrastructural core of the neighborhood. And it really fascinates me that what you're trying to do with the street somehow echoes what the city's trying to do at a bigger scale with its kind of investment and innovation culture and all of that. So the scale of your project got bigger, but in a way, it's sort of like your dog took you down this path. And I think that your confusion of the grassroots and the real estate developer is an incredibly interesting experiment. And I just hope you would be so welcome to come back and tell us how it went. And I think there's some people in the room that want to join you along the way. But
cool.
It's really wonderful that you were here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much.